person called Jesus being crucified than him not being
It's all
crucified.
all rumors.
Well, I know. Like,
And,
what's
this,
the
and if you ask me, I will provide the evidence why this is a rumor.
But you could do the same thing about, like, I know. I
No,
could say
we're not talking
the
about.
Sahaba are all
We're not talking about the Sahaba. We're talking about the claim that is made. So Matthew makes a lot of statements, and you can actually decipher that he's making things up. He's lying, distorting, and inventing and fabricating historical information that is already of the past. For example, let me give you some examples. Matthew says, these are the generations, all of them are 14, from Abraham to David, David to the exile to Babylon, and then up to Jesus Christ, right? 14 generations. He says, these are all the generations. He counts them. 42 generations. But if you go into these people that he is giving you the genealogy of, he's missing out a lot of them in between.
What if that's a mistake?
No, not a mistake, deliberately. Now let me tell you why he's dishonest. The people that he misses, for example, he misses out Jehoiakim. Right? Jehoiakim. Matthew wants to present Jesus to be the son of David, to sit on the throne of David. So he gives you a genealogy of individuals which he considers to be giving you the right of heir for the throne of David. Within this sequence of people within the genealogy, he takes out Jehoiakim. You might think it's not significant, like you said, it could be a mistake. But if you were to go and read the Old Testament, God says about Jehoiakim and his progeny that none of them will have anyone to sit on the throne of David. So God has already, what's it called, like withdrawn this right to claim the throne of David, anyone who comes from Jehoiakim and his progeny. So if you have Jehoiakim within this lineage, it is obviously clear that Jesus, from that genealogy, cannot claim to be the son of David and to be on the throne of David. It's shooting yourself on the foot. He omits this name. So when we examine this kind of, this is page number 1 of Matthew's Gospel, first page, that how dishonest he was with a theological motive of his dishonesty. And why do I say dishonesty? Because he's twisting historical information and saying these are only 14 generations when there are more than 14. This is from page 1. If you go into more and more examples, you'll realize how he's making things up. He's twisting and fabricating, and we've done that enough time. I mean, if you ask even Paul, for example, we've done it together, demonstrating Matthew's dishonesty of historical narration twisting and corrupting it. So, as a person who is presented this claim that Christ was crucified based on testimony of Matthew, I have all the reason to suspect that this man is not giving you the right information, because he is theologically biased. He is perhaps, ideologically biased from his own ideology that he holds, and various other biases that comes in. So to get actual information, I would say you have to take with a pinch of salt. So we don't discount history. We can use what we call methodological neutrality. Stand from that position and assess and see what the evidence presents to you. When we find this evidence, his credibility is in question. What else do we have? We have...
Aren't there secular sources?
Secular sources are late.
Yeah, aren't there like historians who are secular who still think that there's more evidence that
Do you know why?
Jesus was
Do you know why secular historians believe in the death of Christ? Because of their supposed naturalism, presupposition of naturalism. Because what happens is this: if you are alive now, you have to die. That's what the reality of experience of human beings and so on. They can't believe that God intervened and took it up in heaven.
No.
That is the bias of naturalism. That is why they will take those... No, hang on. Let me finish and you can speak.
Okay.
That is why they would have no quarrel. They would have no quarrel in accepting these stories.
That master's on upside down.
Okay, but like you're saying that these other historians have a bias of naturalism.
No, not
so that when you
modern historians. I'm
modern
referring to.
historians. Okay. these modern historians have a bias of naturalism.
Other historians
So that
spread rumors.
they assume that people die. But the thing is though, like they wouldn't necessarily assume that someone died by crucifixion. The fact that they're sort of believing that someone was crucified, that kind of gives them reason to believe that this person would have died from crucifixion, because like what do you have more evidence for? We have lots of evidence of people being crucified and dying from crucifixion. We don't really have any other recorded pieces of evidence for us to believe that when people are crucified they get like teleported to heaven and then have someone replaced on the cross.
The Quran does actually say, whether or not you believe it's revelation, that it was made to appear that he was crucified. So in fact the Quran affirms that kind of understanding. It's not denying in that sense the appearance of crucifixion. It was made to appear that he was it's denying that in the majority view, although there is actually within the Islamic tradition different views on what the Quran actually says. It appears to be saying that he appeared to have died, but that he wasn't. Now if it rejects any kind of datum from the divine, not just from the horizontal but from the vertical as well, as naturalistic historians do, then you're going to be left with that. But if you do actually believe there is datum from Revelation, then in a holistic understanding of life, the universe and everything, you're going to take that into account. But Western historiography is consistently naturalist in its presuppositions. So it will exclude any datum that doesn't come from a this-worldly source. Now, you could do that, fair Jews, if you wanted to, it's fine. But you don't have to have that view, and religious people choose not to have that view. Okay, so Muslims and Christians believe that Jesus was born of a virgin. But you say, we've never ever heard of the Lord bringing about a virgin birth before, therefore it didn't happen. Well, that's a philosophical assumption. It's actually a prejudice against the facts. Because the facts may be actually that divine did create a virgin birth, just so happens, on this one amazing, unique occasion.
Would it be fair to say what you're calling a bias is actually, you could also call empiricism? Okay, yeah, so that means like believing in things based on evidence. So that's kind of a rational way to go about things. That's how we spend most of our lives.
But it's a methodological bias.
It's a methodological bias, and it's not, ultimately, you can't prove that only science, for example, is the only criterion of truth, because science can't tell you that. That is an assumption that you bring to the scientific method. This is the only truth we accept. Muslims and Christians and Jews say, well, there's truth in empiricism, but also there's other layers of dimensional truth which also feed into understanding of reality. So there's an assumption here, which is a philosophical one, which people are entitled not to accept.
Okay, I'm not going to assume that the world is entirely natural. I'm not going to say, like, kind of, this is how I'm going to start looking at the world. But for any given account of the supernatural, any given piece of scripture, like I think it's reasonable to ask what are the reasons to believe that this scripture really is from God rather than a product of man. And so if a piece of scripture is making some claims about things that happened hundreds of years before that piece of scripture was formed or brought into the world, and also the claims of that piece of scripture sort of contradict earlier sources, then we would need to first establish that this piece of scripture, that there is some reason to believe that this piece of scripture is from God.
Everything you said, I completely agree with. The problem is that the Gospel of Matthew, if we're talking about that Gospel of Matthew, does not claim to be scripture, revelation, inspired by God, given by. It doesn't claim any of that. In fact, neither does anything, with the possible exception of the last book of the Bible, claim to be inspired by God. So we're not dealing with something that the author of Matthew thought was scripture, or indeed anyone of his contemporaries thought was scripture. Only much later generations decided, now we are now going to give it that canonical status as the inspired word of God. It doesn't claim that. Now Muslims may claim that their scripture, it does claim to be a scripture and inspired. So you're dealing with apples and oranges, like and unlike here. You can't equate a man-made text that doesn't claim to be scripture with revelation that does claim to be. You're dealing with different
I wasn't trying to claim that the book of Matthew was scripture. I wasn't trying to make that claim. But I mean, so let's try and get back to the original point. Like, I sort of feel that historically there are kind of secular historians, by which I mean kind of people who aren't sort of Christian in their worldview. But there's still historians who think that historically there's more reason to believe that someone called Jesus was crucified. And I think one of the sources
that's what they have. The rumors, the rumors is what they have.
One of the sources they use to infer that is, like, I think Josephus. Like, I've heard this name being brought forward.
Josephus wasn't a witness of the apparent crucifixion anyway. I mean, he was a Roman became a Roman historian. He lived in Rome. He wasn't a
But
witness.
if he's recording this account, then
He had
doesn't
rumors.
that mean that the account was in circulation at the time?
According
like
to the
that?
Quran, if you were there, according to the Quran, just to run with this argument for a second, say you were there in AD 30, and according to the Quran, what would you have seen? According to the Quranic narrative about the crucifixion of Jesus, what would you have seen according to the Quran?
It was made to appear. Like, that's what
So
it
would you
said.
have seen a crucifixion or not, according to the Quran?
Yeah, crucifixion.
Right. What do historians, centuries, thousands of years later, what do they record?
A crucifixion
Exactly.
of-
So the
And they believe
Quranic
that it was
narrative
Jesus.
actually endorses that perspective in some kind of weird way. if you see what I
Okay,
mean.
but it means though that the only reason to believe that Quran narrative is if you have reason to believe that the Quran is from God.
That's
And
my
so-
position. It may not be a position
okay.
of other people, but that's my position.
So is there any reason? Is there any reason to believe that Jesus was not crucified, other than if you believe that the Quran is from God?
Remember the gentleman I spoke to earlier, I said this part A and part B to the question.
Right.
Part A was that Quran is the divine revelation
And it
and
claims
it is a source
that.
of ultimate truth, right?
Right.
But of course, he doesn't agree with that, divine revelation. But
Right.
in principle, he agrees divine revelation should be the source of ultimate truth. But then I moved on saying the evidence that is presented that someone was crucified is at best a well-attested rumor. That is what the Quran is saying. People perceive, they have this perception a crucifixion took place and Jesus was crucified. And the Quran then immediately afterwards says he wasn't killed or crucified, but God took him up. So the perception was there, which led the rumor of the people and the historians to narrate this information, but a miraculous thing happened, that God saved him. That is why it is unique that God, knowing that this perception was
There were
around,
some earlier Christians, by the way, who didn't think Jesus was crucified. There were some Christians in the first century who didn't think, you might not know this, but
I think I've heard of that.
the Basilides, as they're known by patristic scholars, were a group of Christians who didn't believe Jesus of Nazareth was crucified. So it's actually even wrong to say all Christians believe Jesus was crucified. I'm not saying that's evidence for the non-crucifixion of Jesus, I'm just saying that some persecuted Christians didn't believe Jesus was crucified. They believed someone else was.
because there are
Simon of Cyrene.
Do you
There were-
think, on balance, there's more? Is there more evidence supporting that a crucifixion took place
If I was-
that the people around thought was of Jesus?
If I was a secular historian, obviously within that limitation of the appearance of the crucifixion, I would go with that.
Okay.
I mean, it depends how you're coming at this issue and what you limit your frames of reference to. If you go it's purely secular to the appearance, then you're going to conclude, of course, as a naturalist, that Jesus must have been crucified. If you have other data from other sources, which are even more reliable, which is the Muslim argument, then of course you're going to accept that. You're going to upgrade your credibility to something more solid.
All right. Yeah. Okay. So.
It's a matter of faith. I think it's a matter of faith.
and-
Matter of faith. Do you believe the Quran? That's how I say. Do you believe the Quran is the word of God or not? Now you're an atheist, by the way. So we should be
Agnostic.
discussing. Are you an agnostic? Now?
Yeah, I
Very
told you that.
Oh, you've moved along to a bit more. That's good.
Okay. Well, whatever. Sure.
Last time we
yeah, that is a development. That is an internal development,
I
right?
mean, I've always been of the opinion that, I'm not sure whether or not God exists. So maybe some people say atheism is a lack of belief in God. So if you don't take a position, that would kind of be an atheist according to some people, even though the original meaning of atheist was disbelieving in God. But I mean, it can get a bit confused, the terminology.
But if you're in a position where you don't know possibility exists, that God exists, there's a possibility, then that's not atheism, that's agnosticism.
Sure.
That is a strong move forward compared to a total rejection of God, which is like a positive claim that God doesn't exist, an atheism.
Yeah,
so this is in a step that we can discuss further on these issues to demonstrate the case.
Cameraman for this. Hashim was calling.
Okay, I'll be there shortly. Nice speaking to you and to you.
Yeah, nice speaking to you as well.
Unfortunately, the gentleman couldn't carry on the conversation.